Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Reset Podcast. I'm your host, Laura Mineo, CEO of the experience agency Do Flash. Each week, we bring in another business leader who's doing some really interesting and game-changing things, and this week's episode is no different. I'm super excited to have Jed Meyer. He's the Managing Director, North America of Ebiquity, and here in New York. And we're going to have a great conversation talking about data and analytics and what makes these guys tick. So it should be a great conversation. Take a listen. Hey, Jed, great to have you on the show.
Hey, Laura, thanks so much for having me. Really delighted to be here.
Awesome. So as you know, I'm sure you've listened to previous episodes, I always ask the exact same first question, and I'm always fascinated by the answers I get, and I'm sure yours will be no different. Jed, what was your first job?
Thanks for the question. I've listened to several of your podcasts, and it's been really fun to hear the wisdom from the other leaders. My first job was at Nielsen, the Nielsen Measurement Company, and I was a management trainee. This was back in the early 1990s, and we were just kind of coming out of some economic tough times. And I felt really fortunate because I landed a role with a company that was a pretty established company, and I got sort of cross-organizational exposure into research and operations and marketing and sales. And I thought that was a lot of fun. And I thought I'd kind of do that job for 2 or 3 years and then do something else. And one of my other trainees, her name was Quattressa, she had the same perspective. And I think probably about 15 years later, when we were both still at the company, we were once joking that we thought we'd be there 2 or 3 years and in double-digit years.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
Yeah, it was one of those things where, and it's really helped me form a lot of my sort of thoughts as being a leader and a manager. And again, being fortunate having exposure to so many pieces of the company. One of the things was just, every couple of years I would have a different assignment and a sort of stretch in a different way. And the sort of through line between some of those different things was either launching or turning around a division, right? So it was sort of, in 1999, Nielsen didn't have any presence in the nascent internet measurement space. And I was employee number 2 for their joint venture called Nielsen Net Ratings, and helped build like a team to take that to market in 1999, which was like a brand new launch experience.
Wow. So what made you stay 15 years?
Just because every time I turned around, there was a new, different challenge, right? So that was in the turn of the century. And then a few years later, I went back into the sort of core TV measurement part of the business and helped them launch measurement using set-top box data, which in the TV space was sort of just emerging, that cable companies were rolling out set-top boxes that could both collect data as well as provide you the content and the sort of entertainment you wanted. And so doing that was a lot of fun. And then I turned around and they said, "Oh, would you like to move to China?" And I was like, wow, I'd love to move to China. And I had to obviously talk that over with my lovely wife, Julie. And on pretty short notice, within 3 months, we picked up our family and our 2 kids and moved to Shanghai from Brooklyn and lived there for 2 years.
Okay, so how did you get to China? What was it like?
So yeah, it's always interesting, jumping off point for conversations. So going to China was, I often joke, and it is a joke, but it really is a big kernel of truth. One of my first jobs as a trainee was being a sales rep in the Southeast, and I grew up in New England, and I went to school here in New York. And so moving to Atlanta and having a territory in Alabama and Mississippi was pretty much about as foreign as you could get to this Boston kid. Right?
That's true.
And right, and believe it or not, the lessons I learned there in Tupelo, Mississippi, and Dothan, Alabama, really helped me when we moved to China, because I knew that good ideas can come from anywhere, and so there's a lot of people in the Northeast back, this is again 20 odd years ago, who thought that they had a monopoly on the smart, interesting ideas. And I met a lot of really smart, interesting people in Alabama and Mississippi and Florida, which was all my territory. And the same thing was true in China, right? When I went to China, it was, hey, how do we take this team that's been a little bit underperforming and figure out how do we strengthen Nielsen's position in the market and, build a better product and a better client service model and things like that. And so that's the way I like to lead, is sort of get ideas from the group and coalesce them around what is the opportunity, and then how do we, attack that new opportunity.
And so you guys are, living in New York. Yeah, hop on a plane to China, and you're going to build this whole
Yeah.
thing. What was that adapt? What was it like to adapt? Because I'm listening. This in the early aughts, or is this?
Yeah, this is, believe it or not, this is 2009. This is right after the economic downturn.
Wow.
Yeah,
So even more crazy.
yeah, totally crazy. Look, one of the things I loved about China was the pace. The pace was, New Yorkers tend to think that life is fast paced, and it is in New York, right? But it doesn't hold a candle to the speed.
I'm sure.
I mean, it was just literally every day. I would almost pack my suitcase on Sunday night for the week and not knowing where I was going to go, because the nature of business at that time was, I don't speak Mandarin, by the way, and so basically my deputies, I would work with them, and they'd say, "Hey Jed, we got a meeting with such and such a person in Beijing." I'd hop on a plane to Beijing, and then we'd go and have the meeting with that person in Beijing, and then they might say, "Oh, we've got a meeting in Chengdu," and I would always tell them, as long as you can get me a plane or a train ticket, I'll get there, and then we'll have the meeting. And so there was a lot of just that unpredictability, which I found hugely energizing and fascinating. And look, much like the Southeast, I love the food in China, right? And so I would break bread with people and enjoy tea and other local customs, and I found that fascinating. And people responded to that, right? Just like in the South, when I'd say, "Hey, whatever you're eating, I'll eat," right? I mean, obviously, it was a lot less foreign in Alabama, Mississippi than it was in Shanghai.
There
But
might be some alligator in Alabama.
yeah, but still, it's different than whatever. Everything's so much more common these days in America. But it was different to me back in the early '90s. But then when I got to China, I would just say, "Hey, what kind of tea? What's the local provincial tea?" And we would drink the local tea. And what are the local cuisine specialties? And everyone assumes, like in a lot of places, everyone assumes that all of China is the same, and it's not, right? Every province is different. Even within a province, you have distinctions in cuisine and dialect and just the way people, kind of engage and what they specialize in. Just like in America, just like all people are different, it's the same there, right? And so my approach to life is, let's just approach people like, let's figure out if we, find if there's a opportunity to work together and do something that we can both, mutually benefit and find some value for my organization and for your organization. And then if we can do that and kind of create a win-win, then let's figure out how to do that. So that's sort of what I did in China, and just the whole lens of the different culture, different cuisine, just different everything was what I found so fascinating.
Awesome. What was your favorite thing about it?
It's too many to list. Great question. I've said it once, but the food I loved. I loved watching. I studied history in college, and I felt like I was watching history unfold in front of me in China, because one of the places I went to a lot was a city called Hangzhou, and Hangzhou was about a 2-hour train ride from Shanghai with a very nice train, a train that would sort of make our trains in America just look really poor and shabby. And that was when I first got there, right? By the time I finished working there, which was about 2 years, they had already built a new high-speed train, which took that train ride down to about 45 minutes, if I remember right. Maybe it was an hour. It doubled the speed.
Wow.
And it was luxurious and fast and expensive by local standards, but reasonable, right? And so I was like, wow, I can get to Hangzhou in an hour versus 2. That's amazing. And so you just literally, and I have dozens of examples of infrastructure like that was built, and just watching like entire areas of Shanghai, change. I'm probably going to go back to Shanghai next year with my kids and my wife. And we always joke that I'm like, we're going to go back, but our odds of being able to remember, everything being the same are pretty small.
Yeah, I'm sure everything is moving so fast, and the infrastructure is being built so quickly that you won't.
Exactly.
Won't be
Yeah, exactly. So it was a long answer to my first job being Nielsen. And to give you a little bridge back, so basically at the end of that, when I came back, I one of the things I loved about going abroad is just putting yourself in an uncomfortable situation. And I had a mentor named Susan Whiting for many years. Still stay in touch with Susan. She was our CEO at Nielsen, and she used to always talk about how where you step outside of your comfort zone is when you start to learn and grow, and that's really where the magic happens from a growth point of view. And there was one time in our company's history when we were facing a lot of challenges and sort of figuring out how to get the company kind of put it in the right direction again. And she told her whole management team, she encouraged us to step outside our comfort zone. And I really took that to heart. And that kind of led me to agree to go to China. And then when I came back, I was like, wow, that was an amazing growth experience. And how do I build on that? And I kind of knew, you just kind of intuitively know that it was going to be time to move on from Nielsen into something else. And so that's when I started the sort of process of looking for other opportunities, which at the time, having worked at a company for 20 years was a daunting feeling, but I'm really super glad I made that decision and then, went on with the rest of my sort of career arc.
Wow, awesome. I mean, it's so rare that I have on the show someone who started their career somewhere and then stayed there for 20 years.
Yes.
You were the first. You have now.
I can check that box.
You can check that box.
Yeah.
So, what is it you do now? So, after 20 years in Nielsen, getting a chance to live in Shanghai with your whole family, coming back here and then looking at the landscape and seeing how everything has still changed yet again.
Yeah.
How did you end up where you are today?
So, really what I was thinking at the time was, what are the things that appealed to me? And I tried to, again, one of the things I learned in China was how to network, right? And how to talk to people. And I'd never really networked beyond Nielsen for the first, maybe, 15, 18 years of my career there, because I enjoyed the culture and the people and the continued growth. But towards the end, I knew, okay, the company's changing, style management's changing, it's time to start looking for new things. So I started to practice in China, just meeting people and understanding where they were coming from and talking to them about their career journeys and, how they made decisions. So I actually felt a little bit prepared when I came home to start that process in the US and just talk to people. And I find a big part of that is just being a good listener and hearing people's journeys. And I'm fascinated. I still spend a lot of time talking with people, both young people in the industry, my peers, people who are older than me. I think you can learn from anybody. And so, I love just hearing people's journeys because it's just so interesting. It's part of why, I wanted to sit on your podcast and share a little bit with you. So basically when I got back, I started to just talk to people and start to, talk to companies and understand what the landscape was looking like. And it's fascinating. I just came out of a meeting with a big agency here, and they were talking about the ongoing drumbeat of change in the industry. And that's been going on now for so long. It's just like kind of a fact of life. And so when I was leaving Nielsen, one of the places I interviewed was with Omnicom, which is a big agency holding company. And I met this guy named Scott Hagedorn who was running Intellect. And I just found him so fascinating. He was really future-oriented, really bright guy. He was developing a sort of a new approach to an agency within an existing company, right? Omnicom's a big, massive company, but Intellect was this small sort of data and technology and analytics part of the company. And I found him so interesting. And then as I talked to other people about Omnicom and the values of the company and sort of the way they approach clients, I was like, wow, that's super interesting. And when an opportunity opened up there, to kind of lead research for him, I jumped at it. And the interesting thing about that was people really thought I was crazy because, I remember talking to people be like, yeah, I'm leaving Nielsen and I'm going to work at Omnicom. And they were like, what? Like, why would you want to go work at an agency? Those are long hours and tough clients and all this stuff. And I was like, are you kidding? The agencies have a bird's eye view of the whole landscape.
Right.
And Omnicom has blue chip clients like State Farm and McDonald's, and the Disney company, and it really appealed to me. The sort of breadth aspect really appealed to me, and I'm so glad I did it because I spent a little over 4 years there, and I built a great team there, in the research and insights area, and worked under Scott, and helped him sort of really full launch of Intellect and sort of their place in the marketplace. And I loved it because you really got this full view of the marketplace, and you got to talk to clients about what was keeping them up at night. And back then, it was all about millennials and how millennials are changing, consumer product consumption and media consumption and all this stuff. And we got to do some really interesting research on those topics, and I just met some really smart, interesting clients. So I had a great time doing that. And the other thing that was, it kind of appealed to me because it felt a little bit like China. When I would interview people who would come to work at Omnicom, I would ask them if they liked their hair on fire. And if you don't like your hair on fire, I would say don't come to work here. You know, because that's the environment. You know, agency life is very fast. It's very responsive. If, you know, Scott and I used to talk, and Scott would say, Jed, if we don't answer the client's question within X hours, you know, 12 hours, 24 hours, somebody else will. And so you had that sense of urgency, which I liked, and that sense of client engagement. So that part was super interesting.
Awesome. So, okay, so you did Omnicom, and now tell us more about your day-to-day now.
So really briefly from Omnicom, I then had an opportunity to go work at Univision, which you know, is the leading multicultural media company in the U.S. Right, focused on Hispanics, and I had worked with them for years and knew about them, and it was a super interesting demographic to me, and interesting to me to see the sell side. So I did that for a little while, and then I went to Google because obviously one of the preeminent technology companies in the U.S. And just really interesting, you know, sort of their perspective on things and trying to figure out how to bring brand measurement and video measurement into the sort of mainstream of Google was another interesting challenge. But as I went through those two pieces, I liked them, and I found the people there fascinating, and I learned a ton, but I missed that sort of breadth of an agency or a vendor. And so when the opportunity came up to lead Ebiquity's US business, and North America business, excuse me, I really kind of jumped at it because I was like, wow, this gives me, kind of helps me go full circle. I spent almost 20 years of my life at a vendor at Nielsen, and I love the agency perspective. And that's sort of what we're trying to do at Ebiquity, right? Is like help clients understand all this change, be independent. You know, Nielsen was always independent. Our company is independent. We advise clients, we advise marketer clients on what to do, but we don't have a horse in the race. We don't, you know, we advise them on technology outsourcing or insourcing, but we're not there to implement, so we can provide very neutral advice to them about that. We advise them about benchmarks in the industry and help them understand what they're paying versus relative to the marketplace. But again, we're not traders of media. We advise them about effectiveness of their advertising, but we don't, you know, we're not creative. So I really like that sort of independence niche. And I think a lot of clients are interested in that from a point of view of wanting transparency and knowing that they can trust the advice that they're getting.
Wow. So you guys are sort of like the kind of data Sherpas. Like, here's what we recommend, but we won't put our thumb on the scale.
Correct. Yeah, and that's the key piece. Is you know, one of the things I love about the sort of research profession, and one of the things that's sort of undervalued about it, is that you need people to ask questions, right? You know, I got paid for a lot of years to ask questions and be curious and inquisitive, and that's part of like one of the filters I look for when I talk with people. You know, for interviewing people and you know, and for opportunities and whatnot. And so the thing I love about this place is that that's in our DNA, right? We ask questions. We work on behalf of the client, right? The advertiser, which is the way, you know, the whole ecosystem is built around them. So if we can help them do their job better and be smarter, then I think we're adding value to them, and hopefully then they engage with us.
Awesome. So key. And what are some of the trends and things that you're seeing now with some of your clients that you weren't saying even like a year or two ago?
Yeah, there's so many things going on. It's again one of the reasons I don't think we're yet at the pace of China, right, in terms of speed, but the pace of change is so fast that, like, just when I think about the kind of conferences I go to, the client meetings I have, and the topics that people are asking for today, clients are generally overwhelmed by the pace of change, and they want help in sort of navigating that, right? So there's a couple things I would sort of point to. The first is this trend in what they call OTT, or over the top, which means, you know, consumers now can buy discrete, you know, services. They can buy Netflix, they can buy Hulu. Pretty soon they're going to be able to buy Disney Plus, and they can sort of assemble the types of media and content they want a little bit more on their own terms than when they had to buy, you know, a subscription from a cable or a satellite provider. And so I find that fascinating at a couple levels. From a consumer point of view, it's interesting to see the trends on which ones are popular and which ones are ad supported, which ones are not. And then from a client's perspective, it really changes the landscape. I mean, so many, advertisers are trying to figure out, how do I get a message out there to persuade someone to buy my product, whether that's a, fast moving consumer goods like a bottle of shampoo, or much bigger ticket item like a car. And so it just has profound impacts on the landscape, for so much of the viewing now going to these OTT sources, that a lot of clients want to talk to us about that. And we can help guide them on that. We can help advocate for them in terms of measurement, and how to knit together disparate pieces of information across the different landscape. So I think that's an important trend that we have to kind of, keep our eyes on.
Interesting. And
if I can, I want to ask you a question about that. So, like, one of the things I'm fascinated about is how people decide what they watch. So if I could ask you, when you think about like what you watch in terms of video, where does your inspiration come from?
hey, who told you could change the rules in this podcast, Jen? But sure, ask away. Well, I like to say that I have multiple personality disorder when it comes to TV.
Mm-hmm.
Because I watch so many different things in so many different lanes.
Yeah.
Example is yesterday, I watched Succession on demand.
Mm-hmm.
I watched the Tiffany Haddish special on Netflix, and then I caught the tail end of Real Housewives on the Bravo app on my phone.
Mm-hmm. So can you imagine trying to knit that together if you're an advertiser trying to sell you, again, whether it's shampoo or,
What would you even be selling me? Because I didn't fit any bucket.
Right. And so that's the challenge, is how do you get those discrete pieces of information and kind of tie them all together and figure out, okay, this is how we want to target either Laura or someone like you, right, in terms of your behaviors and whatnot. And that's why I love coming to work every day, is because trying to figure out how to help people do that more effectively and more efficiently.
And so, question, like, how would you recommend someone target someone like me? Because I feel that I see Apple Plus coming, Disney Plus coming.
Sure.
Plus I already paid for Netflix and I pay for Hulu.
Mm-hmm.
Also I have on demand. I pay for cable. I'm not a cord cutter.
Yep.
But I live in New York City, and so it's interesting.
It's super hard, right? Because we've had fragmentation for a number of years, but now you have hyperfragmentation, right? Which is, how do I assemble those bits and pieces of data together into a cohesive sort of model where I can try to, again, either send a message to you, or at least segment you enough that I can try to, target it properly, right? And so it's not easy to do. I think there's a couple questions in what you asked. One is just the whole entertainment menu. I think at some point we're going to hit a tipping point, right, where consumers, when Netflix was $9 and your other choices were just your, Charter, Spectrum sort of subscription, Netflix was a great addition, right? But now, like you said, you buy Hulu, if you buy HBO, HBO Now, if you buy Disney Plus, all of a sudden your entertainment bill is going to go up pretty dramatically. And so I actually think, in some way, if you're a cable company or a satellite provider, all these choices are going to demonstrate the value of cable to some degree. Cable, let's call it roughly $100 a month, right?
Well, that's the thing that I was saying to someone the other day, because they were like, well, why don't you, because I was complaining about my cable bill. And
Yeah.
I recently switched from being on Verizon Fios to Spectrum.
Yeah.
It was $100 cheaper.
Right.
For basically the same services. And,
yeah.
But I was like, but the other thing is, I feel like, we get stuck with these recurring things. So like, every month I get billed on my Visa card for Hulu and Amex, and I even forget that it's there.
Yep.
And then I'm traveling for the month. So basically you just got over on me because I just paid my $10 and I didn't look at Netflix once.
Yep. I think there will be a tipping point where people will stay. And look, honestly, part of this could get brought on by the economy, right? If the economy gets softer, which who knows when that will happen, but it's going to happen at some point, right? Whether that's 6 months or 12 or 2 years, I'm not an economist, but at some point it's going to happen. And when it does, people are going to all of a sudden start looking at their Visa bill more closely and being like, oh my God, I'm spending this money on something that I'm not using, right? And so I think there's a lot of things to unpack there, but I think it's a trend worth watching. And I think it does speak to some of the value of the cable or the satellite provider that, a couple of years ago, everyone was writing them off. Oh, cable's dead and we're going to go a la carte and, advertising is dead. I think the future is a little bit around these OTT players and their ability to provide solid targeted ads and a little bit less of them, right? So to me, a company like Hulu, where they have advertising, you can buy an ad-free version, but I think the majority of their consumers buy the ad-supported product. And you can kind of choose. You can say, okay, my daughter watches a fair amount of Hulu, and she says, Dad, I can select to watch a longer ad that's targeted to me, and then I see fewer ads later, and she does that. And so I think things like that are sort of consumer friendly, but they're also advertiser friendly. So back to one of my earlier comments, how do you find a win-win? Advertising is the fuel that supports a lot of the media industry. We've got to, figure out a way to make it more friendly for the advertiser and the message, the commercial or whatever they're going to use to persuade you. But that's also friendly to the consumer, that you're not stuffing so many commercials in front of them that they're annoyed and they're not going to put up with that.
Well, it's interesting because I know, because my side of the business is that we're the experience business, and we have a really well-known publisher as a client, and we're doing more and more offline experiences, even though they have a streaming platform.
Yep.
And they're tying the two together. And It's interesting because, basically they're driving their viewers to come to this live experience about the thing that's on their platform.
Yeah.
So it almost seems backwards, but I feel like you're able to get much more targeted, affinity focused people around a particular product or service by doing that sort of thing. And we've seen them increase the number of events they've done with us from a couple of years. Like now we're on our 15th and we're only in September.
Yeah, no, totally. And look, that's because it brings you closer to the brand, right? Or, the experience, it gives you a memory of that brand or that service and that provider, which is great. The challenge, you know a lot more about your business than I do, but the challenge is how do you keep scaling it, right? And so that's another sort of interesting just trend that I've been observing is some people have great products and services, but it's always about how do you scale them? And how do you bring them out broadly to people and make them, cost effective and affordable, but they get some value out of them?
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think it's do you stay being bespoke and hoping that level of folks will essentially amplify with their own niche audiences online, or do you do every single one in every single city?
Exactly.
So, and I think it's a balance between the two.
Exactly. I want to bring up one other big macro trend, which is around data privacy. And the reason I want to bring it up is because it's sort of in the news. Come the new year, we're going to have the CCPA, which is the California protection, law around privacy. And you're seeing more coverage around different states in the U.S. having laws around protecting people's privacy. And I think one is just the headline that we all have to be mindful of that and treating, the consumer's information with the utmost care. But one of the things that's sort of less well covered by the sort of trade publications that I read around the media business is something that is called intelligent tracking prevention, which is Apple rolled this out a while ago, and it basically has a good intention, right, which is to delete or block cookies, whether they be first party or third party. And the idea is they want to protect user privacy and prevent the ability for people to be, tracked around the web. Very noble and a sound thing that they're trying to do, but the unintended consequences of ITP are advertisers want to know, did my advertising work, right? And so one of the ways they do that is through a technique called attribution, where they attribute, was it the experience that got them to buy the product? Was it the billboard? Was it the TV program? Was it the radio campaign? Was it which of the many different media they right gets the credit? It gets a little bit harder to determine credit with ITP because one of the ways you do that is you drop a cookie and you track through attribution providers. So it's things like that where there are unintended consequences of the legislation, which again I think is well intended and helpful to consumers, but how do we keep the ability of advertisers to be able to target and attribute the credit for their media properly in a world where you have ITP, where you have CCPA, it's all this, jargon of GDPR, EU
Jargon
version.
upon jargon upon jargon.
Right. Yeah, it's a lot of jargon, but the net is if you respect the user and the consumer, how do you communicate with them? And again, what's the value exchange between a service you're providing in exchange for a subscription, in exchange for watching an ad, in exchange for participating in something? Like, how do you do that?
And so where do you think we're going? Where do you think we go from here? Like 24 months down the road, where do you think we'll be in terms of like being able to track appropriately for attribution? Now that we'll be having more of these privacy rules, because we're inching closer to what the U.S.'s version of GDPR.
Yep.
So what do you think happens next?
Yeah, I think, super question. Three big macro themes to me. Number one, the landscape is changing and it will continue to change, right? Technology is making it possible to create, better products and services and more innovative ways to entertain people. You're going to see a lot of focus around short form video in the coming 6-12 months. Through an initiative from Jeffrey Katzenberg, I can't pronounce it, like QB or whatever it's called, right? But they're spending a lot of money to develop short form content that's mobile friendly, and I think things like that will become more popular. So the landscape's going to continue to change. Number two, people want to track the long term, right? And people in this case is advertisers. They want to understand if they're advertising today, do they see an impact in 3 months, in 6 months, in 12 months? It's different for smaller advertisers or fast-moving consumer goods advertisers than it is for a longer-term consideration product like a car, but everybody wants to track that. And so I keep your eye on that. And then the third big bucket is that privacy matters and that everybody needs to have an invested, purpose in that and be aware of it and know how it changes the data that you use. If you're an advertiser, you may or may not have a relationship directly with your consumer. But even if you don't, the third-party data that you buy from companies like Oracle or Google or other companies is going to be potentially impacted. So the whole idea of privacy is really important to track and keep an eye on.
Awesome. So my new favorite question on the podcast is to ask, so what does Jed do to get away? Is it get out of the office and go to the bar around the corner and have a glass of Sauvignon Blanc? Is it boxing? Is it hiking somewhere in the Catskills? Or is it vegging out on reality TV? What for you is that sort of great kind of I take some Jed time for me and just kind of chill out? But I think it's really important for business leaders, especially, to not talk about the fact that it's very important to sort of have some time for yourself and not be chained to your desk, because the world we're far more open about how we're able to sort of to take care of ourselves. So I'd love to hear what you do.
So I'm going to answer your question in two parts. Part one is a small comment on I've worked at places where they say it's not about work-life balance. They call it about work-life integration. And I kind of chafe at that because that sort of means you're working all the time. Right. And you got to turn off at some level, some way, shape, or form. And so one of the things I love about working here, when I got here, I was told from the CEO down that they really discourage email on the weekends. And I was like, oh, thank God I get my because, of course, look, I'm a senior person. There's always work to be done. But it was really nice to just know that, okay, at some level, yeah, your weekend is your time. And part of that could be Ebiquity is based in London and they have a little bit more sense of work-life balance over there than they do here.
Right.
But I just want to put out a quick call out that's an important thing, hard to gauge when you're looking at companies and when you're out there in the marketplace looking for new opportunities. But I'm super glad that I found that here. So now you'll find my answer to your question even more ironic, which is the thing that I like to do to get away is to work. And actually it's to work with my hands.
Okay.
So I'm a member, I kind of live a cliche in Brooklyn. I lived in Park Slope for, my daughter just turned 17. I've lived there since 2 weeks before she was born. So I've lived there for 17 years. I'm a member of the Park Slope Food Co-op. And so literally I do my shift and I do my wife's shift. And I love it because like last weekend I did a shift for her and I was doing food processing, which is literally, making sure that the bags of spices or raisins or nuts are stocked on the shelf. And if they're not, breaking down, I had to break down a giant box of raisins. I think it was roughly a 20-pound box of raisins into smaller bags and then price them and put them on the shelf. And I found that so therapeutic.
Cathartic. Oh my gosh, yeah.
Just like, it was nice. People are talking. They're in the room. We have our hairnets on. We have our gloves on. We're all doing the food processing, and we're just kind of chatting about our kids or whatever, politics, sports, whatever it may be. And I find that super relaxing. And I like that whatever the job is I'm doing there. Sometimes I deliver groceries for people, and I walk with them to their cars or to the subway. Sometimes I'm stocking the shelves. I find it super relaxing to do that. And then the other thing I do related is I try to do some service work. And it's funny because yesterday was 9/11. I'm not sure when this will be played, but today's now September 12th. And I always find 9/11 in New York to be a tough day, and it's sort of viewed differently by New Yorkers than it is by people who weren't necessarily here on that day. And I love this initiative that they have, which is using it as a day of service, because it's a way. So yesterday I volunteered with New York Cares, and we were at the USS Intrepid, and we had roughly, I think, over 4,000, it might have been 4,500 people during the course of the day. It started at 6 a.m. and ended well after I left. I was there from 10 till 3. And we packaged 1 million meals up for people, which can be used over the next several weeks and months by different organizations. And it just felt great to do something to commemorate the day. And they had a lot of different things. They had speakers come in and talk to the group. And we definitely commemorated that it was about 9/11 and remembering what happened on that day. But we were also doing something positive and for good. So even though I was really exhausted by the end of the day and working from 10 to 3 or whatnot with my hands, I was really glad to have done it. And to me, I try to talk about that with my teams, whether I've been here with the Google, Univision, wherever I've been, is just to try to inspire people to do something more than just seeking the almighty dollar. We all have to do that. We all have to pay our rent, and we all have to take care of our families and friends and loved ones. But what can we do beyond that to give back to the community, whether it's a service group, a church, a synagogue, some other organization where you're thinking about somebody other than yourself.
Wow, Jed, I got to tell you, that's wonderful. And I think you're the first person who's talked about service. And I think that there is something really so good about doing good.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great to hear that that's your way of cooling down and vegging out.
Yeah.
It does mean so much, and I think that it also shows that you see the forest for the trees. And so that's pretty awesome. I'd love to get the information on the organizations, New York Cares and such, so we can put that in the website.
Yeah.
For people who also might want to volunteer. And also, where's your food co-op? So we can have people go get some awesome raisins that were packed by you.
Thank you for that. Absolutely. A small plug for New York Cares. It's one of the things I loved about it. I've been volunteering with them off and on for 20 years, and I work with lots of different groups. But the great thing is once you go through orientation with New York Cares, they send out a calendar, which is now all electronic, and you can basically sign up when you have time. So if you like to do service projects with old people, you can do that. If you like to do projects with your hands, you can do that. If you like to work with kids, you can do that. And it's a very flexible model. When I first got out into the work world, my dad used to tell me, look, you either can give back with your your time, or you can give back with your money. And at that time, I didn't have any money, so I did a lot of work with my time. And so it was great. I just got into the habit of, regularly once a quarter, once a month, whenever I had the time, giving back. And it was intimidating. Some of the projects that I wanted to work with, the organizations were like, you have to commit to X number of months, and I couldn't do that because I traveled and all this other stuff. And so New York Cares always had that very open model where if you have the time, look at the calendar. And literally, I've done that. I've just been like, oh, I've got, I knew 9/11 was coming up, and I went on the New York Cares calendar, and they're like, we need people to work on the Intrepid. I signed up, and it was really easy. So I would definitely give you the information, but a nice plug for New York Cares and the great work that they do.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jed. It was a really beautiful way to to end the show. Thank you so much for being a part of the Reset podcast. It's always fun to talk about data because I get to be all nerdy and reality television. So awesome. And it was a delight to have you on the show. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Laura, for having me. Really appreciate the opportunity to share.
Awesome. And that's our